And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law. Now, here's Sterling Fox.
Good morning and welcome to this episode of The Law Show here on CIL 650. Delighted to welcome back to the studio our guests from Murphy Battista LLP in Vancouver, Joe Murphy, QC, a partner with the firm, and Angela Price-Stevens, an associate at Murphy Battista. Welcome back, both of you.
Good morning, Sterling.
Good morning, Sterling.
I was hoping I'd get some response. Joe, you're the partner. Back to 1982. Back us up to the starting days of Murphy Battista. You, the two Joes, Murphy and Battista, start a personal injury law firm under, limited circumstances. There were two of you and two backup staff, right?
It was a modest beginning. It was in January 1982 where businesses were closing. Interest rates were 19%. And we found a lawyer who had extra offices within his office, and we rented two of them in two secretarial bays. We had two secretaries and a part-time bookkeeper, and that's how everything started.
And it's always been about personal injury law, right from the beginning.
Almost entirely. We've done other kinds of, we've done some estate litigation, but mostly injury cases and insurance cases. A lot of car accident cases, some medical malpractice cases, and there's a variety of other ways that people can get badly hurt in accidents. It can happen on a school trip. It can happen on a ski slope. It can happen riding a bike. Tragically, as I say, there's so many ways you can get hurt.
Right. I'm just curious as to why you and Joe opted for this particular branch of the law to practice in. I'm looking for motivations here. It's very noble and all that, but I'm just curious as to why you would select that out of the box as you did.
Sterling, I grew up in a family of 8 children. I was the second oldest of 8 children. My father was a radiologist. My mother, before she started having these multiple children, was a nursing instructor. So each night over the dinner table, I would listen to the medical talk about what my father had seen or what had happened that day.
Okay.
When I was in law school, I was fortunate to get a job as an insurance adjuster. So I worked part-time as an insurance adjuster and went through law school. That was in the pre-ICBC days. But I got an understanding of the system, how it worked, how insurance companies operated. And then when I graduated from high school, I went to work for a firm and took over about half of their personal injury practice, acting for the injured person.
Right.
And that just sort of developed and built over time.
So while you were in law school, though, you got to learn the playbook of the insurance industry, basically, right?
Sterling, I learned far more working part-time for the insurance company than I did sitting in my lectures at law school.
I'll bet you did.
Far, far more.
And was the fact that you got to understand how and why they cut checks for some people and not for others that sort of motivated you even more to go into personal injury law?
Well, it was a real advantage of understanding how the other side of the fence worked, how the insurance industry worked, how they thought, how they analyzed cases, and the medical knowledge I had from growing up in a medical family sort of dovetailed together and led me into that. And, it's gone from being most of my practice in 1982 to all of my practice over the last 20 years.
Angela Price-Stevens comes to us from the UK. You've been with Murphy Battista for quite some time. You, in fact, were a law student in the UK and visited Vancouver, just a person who came here as a tourist, and has been the case with so many thousands of us. You fell in love with the place. You had to go back and finish school, but you determined on that first visit that this is where you'd like to end up. And then you started to learn about people like Murphy Battista from England.
That's right.
So connect the dots for us.
Well, I stalked Joe, basically, for a number of years. Yes, you're right, Sterling. I first came over here in 1994. I came over as a tourist, really nothing more than a tourist. I'd finished law school, but I had to go back and complete my training before becoming a lawyer in England and Wales. But I was here for about 4 months, just loved it, fell in love with the place. I had one of those summers that I hope all of our listeners have had at some point in their youth, where responsibility seemed to be a long, long way away, and there was a lot of fun going on, a lot of socializing. As I say, it was a golden summer. To the point where I seriously considered, sitting on the beach an hour or two before I was supposed to be at YVR, whether I actually wanted to go back. well, if my husband wants me, he can come here kind of attitude, which, you know, is typical me. But I saw the light. I realized if I was going to do this seriously, I had to go back.
Well, you had so much invested in your education by
well,
that time,
absolutely.
too.
I wanted, I mean, I needed to go back and finish my training. But there was an epiphany as I sat on that beach at Jericho, and I resolved that I would be back. And I would practice here as a lawyer. And that, I mean, it took me many years because I went back. I had a great career there. I had 2 children. Life went off in another direction. Had some great breaks in my career, worked with some wonderful lawyers. But at one point, after practicing there for quite some time, I literally had a moment where I pulled up on my driveway late one evening, having come back from work, and I sat there in my nice car on my nice driveway, my kids waving to me from the window. They were quite young at that point. The nanny was there waving at me. So to all intents and purposes, I had this rather wonderful life.
Yeah.
And yet, inwardly, I thought, and I'm going to clean this up, I thought, where the heck did that dream go?
Mm-hmm.
So I tipped the boat. That evening, when the children were in bed, I told my husband, you know what, we're going to Canada.
Wow. Wonderful.
And it started a chain of events that eventually got us here.
Now, a lot of the work that you do, you're with Murphy Battista, a personal injury law firm, but a lot of your time is focused on medical malpractice, Angela. Did that begin in the UK, or have you begun that focus since you've moved to Canada?
No, it was very much entrenched and established while I was practicing in England and Wales.
Okay.
I did a lot of work for the NHS litigation authority. So I was on a panel of firms that would farm out the work from the litigation authority when when plaintiffs' counsel or claimants' counsel, as they're called there, are pursuing a claim against a doctor. So I was basically doing defense work.
Okay.
Which I stayed at for quite a number of years.
You were defending doctors as assigned by the National Health Service.
Absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
I also did work for the Medical Defense Association, which is the equivalent society representing those doctors working or had allegedly screwed up in private practice. Of course, it's allegedly if you're defense.
Mm-hmm.
But it could only last for so long. It was a relationship that was doomed because I did not feel there was a huge amount of dissonance within me as far as taking these instructions. I did not agree with some of the instructions, a lot of the instructions actually that I were being given, and I couldn't stay quiet. So I would rear up against them. I would be educating my client representatives, saying, that's probably not the best set of instructions. Of course, it doesn't go down very well. So it was doomed, and I left doing defense work, switched to doing plaintiff work. Via a wonderful gentleman who has since retired. His name's Andrew Watson, very well-known plaintiff counsel, and I used to be against him on a number of files. And when I dropped out of sight, because I left the defense firm, I called him up out of the blue, and he goes, "Andrew, where have you been? Nobody will tell me where you've gone. Nobody's told me where you've left." And I said, "Andrew, I just couldn't take it anymore." And he said, "Why didn't you call me? Why come and work for me?" So I did, and so that was me getting my feet wet doing plaintiff work whilst I was in England.
Representing people who were suing doctors.
Absolutely.
Right, okay.
And I knew then that's the piece of the puzzle that was missing. But our plans to emigrate had already been cast, and that's pretty much when I started stalking
Joe Murphy.
Joe Murphy.
Right.
I was very much looking at bios and websites and figuring out exactly where I wanted to be now, having figured out what I wanted to do. So I tracked Joe down at a conference and assaulted him while he had a glass of wine in his hand. And the rest is history.
And how long have you been with Murphy Battista?
8 or 9 years now.
And is medical malpractice the bulk of the work these days?
Yes, it is. I do other stuff as well. So I will do motor vehicle accidents, sporting injuries, really any other type of personal injury. But
Right.
my focus is on medical malpractice.
Last time we were fortunate to have the two of you in studio last month, we talked a lot about concussions and brain injuries and such. And one of the things that was suggested we tackle this particular episode is something called chronic pain, which, Joe, sounds fairly self-evident. Chronic pain. We all think we know what that means automatically. So help us to define chronic pain from a legal sense, the sort of chronic pain work that you would do at Murphy Battista.
Well, Sterling, in the clients I have that are diagnosed sooner or later by their doctors as having chronic pain are people who are injured in an accident. The accident appears to be fairly straightforward. The injuries appear to be injuries you'd expect a full recovery.
Right.
And in the course of recovering, these people start to get worse. Their pain starts to mount. And they end up being essentially crippled by this pain that's real to them, but the doctors say physically these injuries should have cleared up. We shouldn't have this pain.
Right.
And the pain over time is like it just erodes their life, it erodes their personality, it erodes their home life, and it just takes this person and dissolves them down to a shell of what they used to be.
Is part of the problem, Joe, the fact that this pain should have gone away? You just said the doctors would normally think that this type of pain would have gone away by now. After all, you had this kind of event and you've been through this sort of therapy. You should be fine by now. What's the matter? That's the kind of thing, right?
Unfortunately, there are some people who in the course of recovery go the wrong way. Their pain gets worse. Now, it's often looked at as someone who's faking it because they say, well, your pain can't get worse.
Right.
You're, if anything, getting better, staying the same. So there's a skepticism. But the reality in the medical community is they recognize some of these people develop this chronic pain. And it's like a massive toothache that never goes away. And slowly it eats away at everything in the person's life. And it takes people who before they were injured, were so productive and so accomplished, and it just makes them into something that you wouldn't recognize in terms of their life before.
And this, Angela, is physical pain. This is beyond discomfort. This is constant pain. This is in no way related to concussions or brain injury, is it? This is a whole different type of malady that we're talking about.
That's right. I mean, traditionally, we identify pain on a scale of 1 to 10. I mean, there's obviously large limitations to just dealing with it on a scale of 1 to 10, but traditionally that's what we do.
Sure.
And dealing with patients with chronic pain, it's not unusual for them to be dealing on a daily basis with a 6 or 7 out of 10. And when you consider that 10 out of 10 is the worst pain they can imagine, that's very significant for them, and it affects them it affects their functioning, it affects how they think, because simply if you're in that much pain, you don't think straight. You can't function. So it does, as Joe has said, it has a devastating impact on their lives.
I'm dating myself here, Joe, but I'm thinking of all people of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who got wounded in the war and had a bad back and lived with chronic pain. His chair in the White House Oval Office was a wooden rocking chair. No pads, just straight backed to deal, and arms so he could get up and down out of the chair easily. He was in constant pain, constant difficulty.
But chronic pain, medically defined now, is different. It's pain that literally consumes you.
Oh, so
people
because he
have
could
bad
work, he had the most
backs,
popular job.
They have a sore hip.
Yeah.
But we're talking about chronic pain that really prevents someone from doing anything that they would normally do.
Because the story behind Kennedy was that he was out there. He got the TV and the showbiz thing. What we didn't see, it wasn't like Roosevelt, who was in braces, but what we didn't see with Kennedy was a lot of the times when he had to be helped from room to room by his Secret Service people. He couldn't walk well some days. But we're talking about a degree of pain, Joe, even more significant than that.
Yeah, we're talking about pain that consumes the whole person's life and prevents them from doing any kind of meaningful work and affects their personality, affects their relationships. It really just eats away at a person's life. And some of these individuals, Sterling, before they were injured, were very productive, very accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
And when they can't produce and accomplish like they did before, that emotionally devastates them. And that just makes the whole chronic pain worse.
Right, right.
The other thing that I think happens is if you live with pain for long enough, your pain threshold, I think, drops.
Because you just learn to tolerate more, right?
Well, you're less able to tolerate more. So
Okay.
that
Because you go through that, don't you? You go through your tolerance level goes up, and then after a while you've got to be worn down.
After
by
a
that.
while, you're just worn down. You're
Right.
worn down physically, and you're worn down mentally,
Right.
and your whole world sort of implodes. So these people, as I say, starting out with an injury that isn't expected to leave any major ongoing problems,
Right.
suddenly just consumes their whole life. And they start out, of course, seeing doctors, and they start out with medications, and as the pain gets worse, the medications are ramped up or changed. And sometimes the medications become part of the problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Because their doctors know them as being a very, motivated, accomplished person, and think the best way to deal with the pain is by using narcotics, and that, and that just makes things worse. It just creates this horrible, horrible dilemma where you have the physical end, and you have the emotional end, and you have the family end, and then you have the medications, the sort of the medical end. They're a mess. They're a mess in the sense that there's no easy way out. There's
Right.
no solution. The medical community doesn't have a template saying, okay, if you're like this, here's how we fix you. It doesn't exist. So these people are really living a life of misery with no easy or ready way out.
And really a quality of life that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, really.
Correct.
Interesting stuff. We need to take a quick break. Our guests in studio from Murphy Batista LLP here in Vancouver, Joe Murphy QC and Angela Price Stevens. They're online at murphybatista.com, and we're back with lots more here on The Law Show on CIL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CIL 650.